They mocked it before the walls were even finished. From the valley below, the shape looked wrong. Not square. Not rectangular. Not anything they recognized. 8 sides. 8 angles that caught the light differently, depending on where you stood. 8 walls that seemed to confuse the eye, breaking the straight lines every other cabin followed without question. Looks like he couldn't decide where to stop, someone joked. Or didn't know how to build a proper house, another added. The laughter carried easily across the open land. Up on the ridge, Elias Crow kept working. He stood inside the skeleton of the structure, boots crunching over packed snow, studying the frame rising around him. The octagonal layout was already clear, each wall section carefully measured, each angle precise. It wasn't random. Nothing about it was. He lifted another beam into place, fitting it into the joint with practiced ease. The timber frame above him formed a symmetrical crown, all 8 sides converging toward a central point where the roof would lock together. It was stronger this way, more stable under pressure, less exposed to wind. But none of that mattered to the men watching from below. To them, it just looked strange. By midday, a few of them made the climb. They always did when curiosity got the better of them. Jonas Hale led the group, as usual. He stopped just outside the structure, hands resting on his hips as he looked around with open amusement. "Well," he said, turning slowly, "I'll give you this. You've built something I've never seen before." The men behind him chuckled. Elias stepped down from the frame, brushing snow from his gloves. "It's an octagon," he said. Jonas raised an eyebrow. "I can count," he replied. "What I can't figure out is why." Elias gestured lightly to the structure. Less surface area exposed to wind. Better heat retention. Stronger underload. Jonas let out a short laugh. "You planning for a storm we don't get?" Elias met his gaze. "I'm planning for one we haven't had yet." That earned a louder laugh. Jonas stepped inside, walking the perimeter, tapping the logs as he went. "Looks like more work for no reason," he said. "You've got more joints, more cuts, more chances to mess something up." He stopped at one of the angled corners, running his hand along it. "And for what? So your house looks like a coin." The men laughed again. Elias didn't react. He had heard worse. Jonas turned back to him. "You could have built a proper cabin down in the valley. Saved yourself time, effort, trouble." Elias glanced past him, toward the distant cluster of homes below. Straight walls, simple roofs, all built the same way. "Those cabins leak heat," Elias said. "Corners trap wind. Roofs lose warmth." Jonas shrugged. "They've worked just fine so far." Elias nodded once. "So far." Jonas smirked, shaking his head. "You always think something worse is coming." "I know it is." The certainty in Elias's voice didn't match the easy confidence of the valley, and that's why they didn't take him seriously. Jonas clapped a hand against one of the beams. "Well, when your fancy angles don't save you from a normal winter, you're welcome to come down and join the rest of us." The group laughed as they headed back down the ridge. Elias watched them go, then turned back to his work. He didn't rush. Every wall segment was sealed tight, logs fitted with precision, gaps packed with a dense mix of clay and fiber. The angles weren't just for shape. They redirected wind, preventing it from hitting any single surface head-on. The roof was the final piece. 8 triangular sections, each sloping inward, meeting at a central point. It took time, care, and more effort than a simple structure ever would. By the time it was done, the cabin stood like something deliberate. Balanced. Complete. From above, it would look almost perfect. From below, it still looked strange. And the laughter didn't stop. If anything, it spread. "They say his cabin's got more sides than sense," someone joked in the valley. "Let's see if all those angles keep him warm," another replied. Elias didn't respond. He finished sealing the final seams just as the first frost settled across the land. Inside, the cabin felt different immediately. The shape changed how the air moved. Heat from the stove didn't gather uselessly in corners. It circulated, moving evenly across the space. The angled walls reflected warmth inward instead of letting it drift and disappear. Elias stood in the center, watching it, feeling it, working exactly as intended. That night, he let the fire burn low, just enough. The warmth stayed, held, balanced. Down in the valley, life moved as it always had. Cabins stood with their familiar shapes. Fires burned strong, then faded quickly. Doors creaked in the wind. But no one worried, because winter here had always been manageable, predictable. Something you endured, not something you feared. The first sign came with the wind. Elias noticed it before anyone else. It shifted direction, sharpened. Instead of rolling through the valley, it began striking it. Hard, direct, unforgiving. He stepped outside, looking north. The sky had a brittle clarity to it. Too clean, too still. The air felt thinner, colder than it should have been. He went back inside and reinforced the door. Down below, no one noticed. Not yet. The temperature dropped overnight. Not gradually. It fell. Hard. By morning, the valley felt different. Fires were burning earlier. Hotter. People kept their doors shut longer. But still, no one panicked. Just a cold snap, they said. It'll pass. It didn't. The storm arrived fast. A wall of wind and snow tearing across the land, swallowing distance, erasing the horizon. Temperatures plunged further. Fire struggled. Walls creaked. The cold didn't stay outside. It forced its way in. Through seams. Through wood. Through everything. Inside the valley cabins, heat vanished faster than it could be made. Men fed their fires constantly. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Because the problem wasn't the fire. It was the structure. Up on the ridge, Elias stood inside his octagonal cabin. The storm slammed into it, but not the way it hit the valley homes. The angled walls deflected the wind, breaking its force instead of absorbing it. Snow didn't pile unevenly, it distributed evenly around the structure. Inside, the warmth held, not trapped in corners, not leaking through edges. It moved, circulated, stayed. Elias placed his hand against one of the walls. Solid, warm, unshaken. He looked toward the valley, barely visible through the storm. He knew what was happening down there. He had seen it before. He had lived through it once. And he knew something else. They wouldn't last the night. Then, a sound, faint at first, lost in the wind. A knock. Elias turned. The sound came again. Stronger. Desperate. He moved to the door, unbolting it slowly, bracing himself. When he opened it, the storm surged in. And in the middle of it, a figure stood there, barely holding himself upright. Jonas Hale. Snow clung to his coat, his face pale, eyes wide with something far removed from confidence. The cold, he rasped. It's taking everything. The fires, they can't hold it. He stumbled forward. Your cabin, he said, voice breaking. It's the only one still standing against it. Elias said nothing. Jonas looked at him, all pride gone. Please. Elias stepped aside. Jonas staggered in, boots slipping slightly on the wooden floor before he caught himself against one of the angled walls. The door shut behind him, cutting off the storm like a blade. Silence. Not complete silence, but controlled, contained. Jonas stood there for a moment, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling as if he had just escaped something far worse than cold. Then he noticed it. The warmth. Not the sharp, uneven heat of a struggling fire, but something steadier. Balanced. It filled the space without force. He turned slowly, eyes moving along the walls. How, he whispered. Elias moved to the stove, adjusting it slightly. The fire inside was small, barely more than glowing embers. It circulates, Elias said. The shape moves the heat, keeps it from settling or escaping. Jonas pressed a trembling hand against one of the angled walls. It was warm, not just near the fire. Everywhere. There are no cold spots, he said, almost to himself. Elias nodded once. No corners for it to die in. No flat surfaces for wind to hold against. Everything moves. Inside and out. Jonas swallowed, his voice quieter now. They're freezing down there. Elias looked at him. How many? Jonas hesitated. Then, all of them. The words hung between them. Elias didn't waste time. He grabbed his coat, pulled it on, and reached for a lantern. Jonas frowned. You can't bring the whole valley up here. No, Elias said. But I can keep them alive long enough to get through the night. He opened the door. The storm pushed back, but Elias stepped into it without hesitation. Jonas followed. The descent was brutal. Wind shoved them sideways. Snow blinded them. The cold felt heavier now, like it pressed through clothing instead of around it. They reached the first house. Elias forced the door open. Inside, the air felt worse than outside. A family sat near a weak fire, barely moving, their breaths slow and shallow. Up, Elias said, firm. You're coming. No one argued. They didn't have the strength left to question him. Trip by trip, they moved through the valley. Each house, each family. Some needed help just to stand. Some had already stopped speaking. Elias didn't slow. He kept the groups small, manageable, guiding them up the ridge in waves. Inside the octagonal cabin, he organized them quickly. Stay along the walls, he instructed. Spread out evenly. Don't crowd one side. People pressed against the angled surfaces. At first, there was confusion, then relief. The warmth wasn't trapped near the fire. It was everywhere. The structure itself held it, moved it, kept it alive. More people came. The cabin filled, then filled again. It grew tight, but not desperate. Because the heat didn't break. It held. Jonas watched it happen. Watched as people who had been fading slowly steadied. Watched as their breathing normalized. Watched as fear gave way to something else. Understanding. By the time Elias made his final trip, the valley had gone still. No movement. No light. Just snow-covered shakes where homes once stood strong. He paused at the base of the ridge for a moment, then turned back. The climb felt longer this time. He was tired now, but he didn't stop. When he reached the cabin, Jonas opened the door immediately. Inside, it was packed. Dozens of people, shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in blankets, leaning against the walls. But they were alive, warm, stable. Elias stepped in and closed the door. The storm vanished again. For a long moment, no one spoke. They just looked at him, not with laughter, not with doubt, with something quieter, something earned. Jonas stepped forward. His voice had changed. You knew this would happen, he said. Elias shook his head. I knew it could. Jonas glanced around the cabin. The angles, the structure, the way everything worked together. We built wrong, he said quietly. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. Hours passed. The storm weakened. Wind softened. The cold lost its edge. No one froze. No fire had to fight. The cabin did what it was built to do. By morning, the storm was gone. Elias opened the door. Cold air slipped in, but it was manageable now. Normal. People stepped outside one by one. The valley was buried. Roofs sagged under heavy snow. Doors were frozen shut. Chimneys stood silent. Homes that had once seemed solid now looked fragile, temporary. Men stood in silence, taking it in. Then slowly, they turned back toward the cabin. No one laughed. Days later, when the snow began to melt, they came back up the ridge. Not to mock, to learn, with tools in their hands, with questions instead of jokes. Why 8 sides? One asked. Elias looked at the structure. Because nothing hits it straight, he said. Wind breaks. Heat moves. Nothing gets trapped where it shouldn't. They listened. This time, they understood. By the end of winter, new cabins began rising across the valley. Not square, not simple, but shaped with intention. Stronger, smarter, built for what might come, not just what had already passed. And at the top of the ridge, Elias's octagonal cabin stood exactly as it always had. Unmoved, unshaken, no longer strange. Now necessary. Because in that valley, they all learned the same thing. The hard way. It's not the design people understand that saves them. It's the one they laughed at until they needed it.